We are now live. I boleh buka tutup kamera I physically. Okay, Ustaz Silah, you're live now.
Boleh start ya?
Ya.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and good morning everyone. On behalf of the Institute of Graduate Studies UiTM, I would like to sincerely thank you for joining IPSIS webinar series 2021 this morning. And the title of our webinar session this morning is How to Read Journal Articles and Build Models for Your Research. I am Azila Anis, the Head of Department of Postgraduate and Professional Studies for Faculty of Business and Management, UiTM Shah Alam, the moderator for this morning session. Our special welcome to our distinguished speaker, Professor Dr. Roshayani Arshad from Accounting Research Institute, UiTM Shah Alam, the top management of IPSIS, UiTM, lecturers and postgraduate students of UiTM. Before we proceed further, let's begin our session with Al-Fatiha for our session this morning to be blessed and more barakah. Al-Fatiha. Amin amin ya rabbal alamin. So may our event be blessed and run as accordingly. Distinguished speakers, lecturers and students, before we start, let me give you a brief introduction about our speaker, Professor Dr. Roshayani Arshad. Professor Dr. Roshayani Datuk Arshad is a senior research fellow at the Accounting Research Institute, or we call it SRE UiTM, a higher institution center of excellence granted by the Ministry of Education Malaysia. She is also a research fellow at Permodalan National Berhad Research Institute, heading the Social Impact Assessment of PNB's Corporate Social Responsibility Initiative. Her research interests are financial accounting and reporting, good governance, and sustainable investment and impact assessment. Her current research project focuses on the development of sustainable social sector ecosystem in Malaysia. These projects are conducted in collaboration with the main regulatory authorities for the sectors, companies, Commissions of Malaysia and Registry of Societies, Pusat Pungutan Zakat, MAIWP, as well as Agency Inovasi Malaysia. Concurrently, a group of postgraduate candidates are being supervised and collaboratively have published a significant number of articles in the area of social sector in both local and international journals. To contribute further to the social sector development, the accumulated expertise is being shared through involvement in women in social enterprise projects, founder of Social Enterprise, Berbudi Kitchen, presidents of Majlis Kebangsaan Aspirasi Malaysia Civil, and presidents of International Association of Social Enterprise Economics. She also teaches full-time at the Faculty of Accountancy UiTM on various courses related to financial accounting and reporting, provided extensive training of financial reporting to practitioners, and published several textbooks used by students pursuing diploma and bachelor in accountancy programs offered at various universities in Malaysia. Her latest book on financial accounting and reporting was published by Oxford University Press in January 2018. Obviously, the list is too long for me to highlight her credibility and expertise that she has collected throughout her career. Therefore, now, without further ado, I will turn the time over to Professor Dr. Roshayani Arshad with how to read journal articles and build models for your research. Professor Dr. Roshayani, over to you.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to everybody in the audience, and thank you very much to Dr. Noor for the kind introduction. And I will now actually not to actually delay our presentation. I would actually like to highlight to you that you are very welcome to ask questions. I think in the they call it in the Q&A chat box, okay, and Dr. Azila will actually post the questions later. Okay, so I will start, and I think this is a very important topic, and not to say that I am an expert in the area, but I would actually like to share based on my experience doing my own PhD work, as well as being able to refine from what I have actually done together with many of my postgraduate students, okay, mainly PhD students, okay. Right, so it is one of the most important component in your thesis, basically how to read journal articles and build models for your research, okay? So I will now go on to my slide presentation, right? Okay. All right, so let me know if you can see the presentation now.
Yes, Prof.
Okay, all right. So I will now go to the slide presentation. Slideshow, okay. All right. So basically, the title, as I mentioned earlier, how to read journal articles and build models for your research, and my email addresses, I am showing it here, but I would actually recommend if you have if you want to communicate with me, I would actually encourage you to use my alternative email, roshayani2013, because that email is not so, there's not so many emails as I receive under UiTM mailbox. Okay, so I actually prefer for people to communicate with me through that Roshayani2013 email address. Okay, all right. So basically, what I will do is actually start with the definition. It's not a formal definition, but basically definition for us to be on the same page, because I understand under this platform there are many types of participants. What I meant by saying that is that the participant will actually be involved in various types of research. Maybe a number of participants will be at PhD level, some of you might be at master's level, and you are also doing different types of research. It can be under the two main groups, qualitative or quantitative, or in between, okay? And the areas and the topics will be different. Right, so basically the definition is to align the perspective on what I meant by models, okay, when I am actually going through this presentation. Okay. Next one, I will move on to development of research model, and I will normally, when I actually share my presentation, especially in the context of PhD work, I would actually try to put down in steps. Maybe because I am from accounting background, we normally have, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on. But I think having steps, actually these steps have been developed over time as I actually supervise students. I see based on my the supervision, I see that there are challenges to actually allow them to understand. So over time, these steps actually evolve, and I think it will actually facilitate you to think more systematically in developing your research models. Okay, and then I move on to show the research models, linking it to the thesis structure, because at the end of the day, why you need to know why is the model important. Okay, what is the reason you having this model, and how does it actually facilitate you? To me, this model is like your heart. Okay, so if your heart is not healthy, the overall well-being of your body is not going to be optimized. Okay, so if you have a healthy heart, okay, you are going to be able to do or to perform as the base to perform most effective. Okay, so in terms of thesis, it is going to be a very well structured thesis. Okay, and at the end of this presentation, the most important thing is for me to share with you, and hopefully you will be able to, it will actually be able, whatever sharing that I am doing will be able to make an impact on your work. Okay, so hopefully it will benefit you, and to do that, I am going to share a few examples. So I will start with a simplified example, and then moving on to a comprehensive example in developing the research model. Okay, all right. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, so we are starting with the introduction so that everybody on the same page here. So working definitions, I'm not saying that these are the right definition, but just to explain so that we are on the same page. Okay, so some of you, so whatever it is, if you decide you want to have a conceptual framework in your thesis or theoretical framework or whatever it is, it must be in agreement with your supervisor. But nevertheless, I'm just going to share what it means by theoretical framework, conceptual framework from my perspective. Okay, so theoretical framework is an element of a conceptual framework that situates the relationships explored in the study. Okay, and conceptual framework is the purpose is to generate elements of the research design, methods, clarifications, explanations, and justifications. Okay, but take note, okay, one of the recent reference, many authors do not really differentiate between conceptual and theoretical framework. Okay, because if you see the definition that I actually extracted from the literature under theoretical framework and conceptual framework, the keywords, okay, that I highlighted in red is under theoretical framework situates the relationships explored in the study. Next one, to generate elements in the study as well, okay, the main components in the study. So to me, I see that they are very interrelated, basically to come up with a model that actually show the relationships between the various elements of interest that you are going to research in your study. Okay, all right, so that's the definition. So you can see on my right, okay, will it be easy? Definitely no. Will it be worth it? Definitely. Okay, so once you have this, the rest is going to be very easy. Your PhD journey or your master's journey is going to be very easy because you already have the structure. You only need to operationalize and complete your thesis. Okay, so this is very critical for you to actually develop. All right. Okay. So how are we going to develop this? I actually has broken it down into 3 steps. Okay, into 3 steps, right? Okay, step number 1. Right, irrespective of whether you are doing quantitative research or qualitative research, because at the end of the day, quantitative or qualitative is actually referring to your research methods, but you are still doing a research. Okay, so irrespective of quantitative or qualitative, this sharing session is going to be applicable to you. Okay, all right. Right. So number 1 is basically identify the focus or dependent variable of your study, because if normally people will say that, oh, I am doing qualitative, I do not have a dependent variable. Okay, if you are doing quantitative, you have a dependent variable, but nevertheless you will be able to have a focus which is actually more or less equivalent to the dependent variable in quantitative study. Okay, so you need to know what you want to do, rather than, even if you are qualitative, you're not just sitting down and thinking of doing something. What is that something? Okay, so that is actually leading towards the focus of your study. All right, the main variable that you want to focus on. Okay, so I'm going to start with the step number 1. Okay, I'm going to use from my perspectives. If you notice just now when Dr. Azila was describing my background, I am basically, my technical area is in the area of financial accounting and reporting. Okay, I have been trained as a professional accountant, and when I joined UiTM, I have been teaching areas in financial accounting and reporting. So when that is my strength, that is the accumulated professional expertise that I have developed, and that is my strength as well. I really like financial accounting and reporting, but when I want to do my PhD thesis or PhD research, I want to be able to capitalize my strength rather than doing something that is very new, that is beyond me. So I need to understand. I do not have that background. Okay, say for example, I want to do something in art. All right, I do not have any technical expertise accumulated over the period. So why do I want to actually do in that area? Because I won't be able to actually extend myself. All right, add value to myself, and then later you will add value to others as well. So my area, so capitalizing on my area of expertise, existing area of expertise in the area of financial accounting and reporting, and when I read, I identify, okay, actually initially I never thought that I am going to do voluntary corporate disclosure decision. Reason being, because when you are trained as professional accountants, your main focus is on compliance. When you say compliance, is on mandatory reporting or disclosure. So, but when I read, I continue to read, and during the period I wanted to do my research, okay, the issue was more on voluntary disclosure. Okay, so I do not actually confine myself saying that no, I'm not going to do this because it's not related to my strength. I don't know anything about it. Okay, so have an open mind when you want to actually decide on your focus or dependent variable of your study. So I've decided based on the environment during that period, and then the issues surrounding that area. Okay, so I've decided to do voluntary disclosure decisions by management. Okay, so when you say voluntary disclosure, it is actually decided by the management of the organization. All right. Okay, so that's what I want to focus on. So step number 1A, I put there 1A, that is my focus. I am going to look at management decision to disclose voluntarily in their financial statements, okay, or to the public, to disclose to the public. All right, so step 1B, okay, the issues surrounding the period that I wanted to study, okay, during that period, there was an issue about if the management is going to disclose on voluntary information, is it going to be reliable? Can we actually trust the information that they are reporting? Okay, so the term I decided to use is credibility of information to be disclosed. All right. it is very important, because if the information is to be reported to the public, it has to be of certain credibility so that the public can actually use the information to make their decisions. Okay, and on the other hand, if they are not reporting reliable information, so that means we can see that they are reporting, but it's not reliable. So what are they trying to do? Okay, so they are trying to actually manage our perception, saying that, oh, this company is good. They are actually reporting a lot of information to the public. Okay, so when I read, I found this term, they are actually using management of impression strategy. Remember, my focus is from the perception of the management. It's not, because at this point in time, sometimes students will actually find difficulty. Am I focusing on the company, or am I focusing on the user of the information? So you need to be clear your focus as well as your, actually when I say the company, so the company is going to be the sample of your study, but you don't worry about the sample yet. You need to be clear on the focus, okay, focus, all right, focus of your study. So as I mentioned, number one, are they, when they are actually reporting voluntarily, is it going to be credible? Can I trust the information? So if I cannot trust, what is happening? Because they are trying to manage my perception, okay? So the term in the literature is management of impression. So you can see step C. So when I actually look at this, basically what I am doing is actually I am looking at the quality of the information that the companies are disclosing. Don't worry about the one effects on return earnings relationship. Okay, that the reason I put it in bracket, because that is how I measure it. Okay, but at this stage, at this point in time, you are not concerned how to measure it yet. Okay, you only need to know your focus. You are trying to find your focus. Okay, so even for those who are already in the advanced stage of your study, this will actually allow you, when you go through this session, this will actually allow you to revisit and see whether this is the whether you can actually refine further whatever focus that you are looking at. Okay, because doing a research work is a continuous development of your work. Okay, so it doesn't mean that you have done it, it is already okay. Okay, especially when there are new articles, okay, that are being published, and it might actually affect the requirement of your focus of study. Okay, so this is step number one. Right, now let's move on to step 2. Okay, remember, at the end of the day, we are developing the model, okay, for our study. So step 2, now you know what you want to do. Next, identify the theory or theories for your research. Sometimes you use one theory, sometimes you use more than one theory, okay? But I would actually refrain from using 3 or 4 or 5 theories, okay? Because it will actually, if you have so many theories, how can you focus, okay? Because a PhD work or a master by research work is a very in-depth study, okay? So you cannot have too wide focus because you want to have in-depth study, okay? All right, so how do you identify the theory or theories to be used? Step A, 2A, okay? Identify the themes in the literature, because the title of today's session is how to read journal articles and build models for your research. I am not actually showing you how to read, okay? I am sharing with you how to actually identify journal articles to read to build models for your research. Okay, that's what I am doing in this session. I am not actually going through how to read an article, all right? Okay, so now, how do you identify the themes in the literature? Because sometimes what happens when students go and meet their supervisors come and will tell them, go and read more. Okay, but how do you read? What to read actually? Okay, so by having these themes, you will be able to identify, to actually use the keyword to search for the relevant articles to read, so that you continue to develop your model. Okay, right. So you are going, okay, you can see in the previous slide just now, okay, I am looking at disclosure decision because my thought was at that time when based on the information that I have already accumulated, is it going to be credible or are they only actually managing the perception of the readers? Okay, so those are the two big themes. Okay, so those are the two big themes in your study now. All right, two big themes. This decision about credibility of information to be voluntarily disclosed, decision about management of impression strategies through voluntary disclosure. Okay, so next. Now you have the perspective or the themes that you want to look at. So when you read article, you'll be able to see, okay. This is similar to, say for example, you go shopping and if you do not have anything in mind, you will not actually be able to find what you want to shop. Okay, so for example, okay, for example, now you know that you want to buy, what do you want to buy? A dress. Okay, because I'm a girl, so I'm going to buy a dress. So I want to buy a dress. But what type of dress? You need to have a theme, okay? So maybe you want to buy something in red. So once you already found one red dress, suddenly when you go to other shops, you'll be able to see, wow, suddenly in the first place, it was so difficult to find the red dress. Once you find one red dress, suddenly when you see other shops, there are so many red dresses. Okay, similar to this, okay. So when you when you actually do your search, you see a lot of articles, but you might actually miss the relevant articles because you don't have a perspective or themes to actually guide your brain to actually identify the literature. Okay, so once you have the themes, you'll be able to find the right literature. Okay, so for example, so now you can see it is actually falling into places. The group of articles that you can actually read. Because what happens sometimes, if you confine yourself to say, for example, if you do not have a theme, okay, so imagine you do not have a theme, you know that you are looking at voluntary disclosure. You don't have in the context of credibility, in the context of management impression. So when you start going through the literature search, you only want to see voluntary disclosure. And then you will go back to your supervisor and tell your supervisor that there are not so many articles being published. Why? Because you are looking at a very narrow focus. You only want to see voluntary disclosure. But if you look at credibility of voluntary information, it can actually be any types of voluntary disclosure. It can be, I'm looking at corporate disclosure. There might be articles on environmental disclosure. There might be articles on management decision disclosure. Okay, so whatever it is related to voluntary disclosure and from the perspective of credibility, suddenly you open a wide range of articles to read. Okay, so that's the reason why it is important to have the themes that you want to look at. Okay, all right. So you can see here the guide to the literature search. Okay, number one, corporate financial reporting, because I am interested to look at corporate financial reporting, and I am looking at management voluntary disclosure. Okay, and then I will be able to find articles related to those themes. Okay, and I refine further. When I started to read the articles, I refine further to see important mechanism for companies to manage expectation through their reporting practices. Okay, through their reporting practices, right? So I'll be able to see, now I will be able to actually group the relevant articles. Okay, moving down, management motivation to disclose, because I am looking from two perspectives. Are they actually motivated to disclose credible information, or are they interested to disclose to manage the perception of the readers? Okay, so now I'll be able to see that perspective, their motivation. What is their motivation? Okay, so based on that, I can see there are articles related to concentrated ownership jurisdiction. Then only I realize, or I know, that in Malaysia, if I am going to do based on samples in Malaysia, Malaysia is one of the country that falls under concentrated ownership jurisdiction. That means the owner of the companies are owned by, say for example, family owned. Okay, so that means it is concentrated ownership. It is not actually owned by many shareholders in the company. All right. So mainly based the companies are actually owned by a certain group of shareholders. And I also, based on my readings, okay, I'll be able to see that, in this jurisdiction, the managers have less motivation to disclose. Okay, so now I'll be able to understand more from my reading. Okay, so now based on the earlier guidance, I'll be able to see the issues in the area. Okay, so this is how you find issues, all right? And then moving down to get support from stakeholders. Because we are saying that they want to manage the readers. Okay, so is it because they want to get support or otherwise? All right. So this established as an expectation for public listed companies to engage in socio-economic. Hang on, I cannot see that word. In socio-economic development, okay, because it is important to be perceived as supporting the government initiative. So those two teams are now actually guiding me to search in three groups of literature. So now the literature has been widened. So this is why I said earlier, when you do PhD, you are doing in-depth research. Okay, when you do in-depth research, you need to read the relevant group or components of literature so that your work is really strongly supported by the literature. Okay, right. So that is 2A. Next. Okay, identification of the theory. Okay, identification of the theory. Now you are reading. Okay, now you read and you read and you read. And now, because it is a PhD work, it is a research work, it is an academic research work, you need to have a theoretical perspective in your work. Okay, so how do you find theory? This is another big hurdle for many candidates doing postgraduate study to find the right theory for their work. Okay, so number one, okay, there are important structure to actually identify your theory. So number one, identify the theory cluster. What do I mean by theory cluster? Before you actually identify the specific theory that you are using for your study, you will have an umbrella theory. Okay, so that means, say for example, you want to look at specific theory on signaling theory. So that is the specific theory that you are going to use, signaling theory. But the parent theory or the umbrella theory is accountability theory. Okay, so that's what I meant by theory cluster. Okay, theory cluster. Next, you move down to identifying specific theories relevant to that cluster. Okay, so that means, say for example, as I mentioned earlier, accountability theory, and then under accountability theory, you can have signaling theory, agency theory, and so on. All right. From then, you move down to identifying the specific theory to your study. Okay, propositions of that theory that relates to the specific study and review of prior studies using that theory as a focus. Now, how do you actually move from your cluster of theories to the specific theory? You link to the issue that you want to focus on just now. You link to the issue that you want to focus on, okay, i.e. on credibility of the information disclosed and also on managing the perception of the readers. Okay, so the theory that is relevant to you, that you zoom, is actually based on the perspective of your study. Okay, right, next. Okay, now once you have this, okay, now I am actually showing you how to link to the perspective of your study. before you finally decided on your specific theory. Okay, before you decided on your specific theory. So link teams, remember we have two teams just now, okay, to the potential variable to theory or theories. Okay, so number one, your main focus is on voluntary information by managers or by companies. Okay, so number two and number three are actually two perspectives that you want to look at, okay, that you are interested to look at, whether managers are actually disclosing credible information. Okay, so there are a few potential theory here: agency theory, resource dependence theory, and so on. Okay, likewise, when you move down to management decision to actually manage the perception of the readers, there are also a few potential theory that you can use. Okay, for example, legitimacy theory, institutional theory, and so on. Okay, so once you identify one or a few theories that you want to use, next is to actually refine further to identify the key theory that you want to use for your study. Okay, you can see here now. So we are done with step 1A, 1B, 1C. Now 2B, okay, 2A, you know, those are the two theoretical, not two theoretical perspective, two perspective that you want to look at in your study. Okay, management decision, whether they are disclosing credible information or they are actually disclosing to manage the impression of the readers or stakeholders. Okay, so once I've identified a few potential specific theory to be used, but because, so you can see, say for example on under 2B, okay, the first theory that I've decided to use is agency theory. Why? Because I am actually going to research my sample in Malaysia. And in Malaysia, as I mentioned earlier, based on my reading of the article, I noticed that we are under the concentrated ownership jurisdiction. And under that concentrated ownership jurisdiction, highly likely managers do not want to disclose credible information voluntarily. Okay, highly likely they might not want to do that. So the most relevant theory for me is actually agency theory. Okay, under agency theory, they are in this jurisdiction, they are saying the agency conflict is quite high. Okay, so I want to see from that perspective. All right, and when I also when I want to try to find whether they are actually disclosing to manage the perception of the investors, I am able to identify legitimacy theory. Okay, legitimacy theory. Sorry, the big theory is actually institutional theory. Okay, so I am actually managing the impression. So you can see here the two perspectives actually guide me to identify the most relevant, because there are a few potential theories that are relevant. But what is the most relevant theory that I want to use for my study? Okay, so the most relevant one I've decided based on the readings and the context that I want to use is agency theory and legitimation theory. Okay, right. Next, identify potential variable cluster. Now you have the theoretical perspective. You are going to find the potential variable group or cluster for your study for you to actually start doing your research work. Okay, you need to know what are you looking at. All right, so remember, it doesn't matter whether you are doing quantitative or qualitative, you still need to know what you are going to look at. Okay, so if you are looking at quantitative, you need to find the variables. All right, so now what are the variables? So by having those whatever you have those just now, you are now going to be able to actually develop or identify the relevant variables that you are going to research on. Okay, so you can see the steps involved actually lead you not just to the development of your model, it also actually lead you to the development of your variables as well. Okay. So now you can see what we are trying to do. We are trying to identify the variables, because right now what we have on the screen is you still cannot actually start your research work, okay, because you do not have the variables to actually search for or to research on. You have the issue, you have the gap, but you need to find the research variables or variables of interest, okay, that you want to look at. All right, so you need to fill those gap in your model. Okay, so I hope you can see so far the model is actually important because it actually helps you to refine your focus. Later you'll be able to see it will actually lead to your refinement of research objective. But right now, you have a big picture of your objective of what you want to do, but it's not refined yet. Okay, so don't try too hard to refine your objective before you actually refine your model. Okay, it can be both ways, but you have to actually mutually refine so that it is very focused. Okay, all right. So now you can see, okay, as I read further, I'll be able to identify the variables that I want to do for my research. Okay, so I want to see, okay, whether from my theoretical perspective, management are going to disclose credible information, and how or what can actually be done to actually motivate managers to disclose credible information is through corporate governance structure. Because at that time when I was doing my PhD, it was something very new in Malaysia to overcome that issue, to overcome that problem. Okay, so I am going to look at various corporate governance mechanism, whether it can actually motivate managers to disclose credible information. But remember, they might actually disclose to actually manage the perception of the readers. Even though corporate governance structure are there, they might actually be able to go around it. Okay, even though the governance mechanism are there, they might be able to go around it. Remember, this is voluntary information. Okay, voluntary information. They are not going to be penalized if they are disclosing information to manage the perception of the users. Okay, so what am I going to look at? The variables that are going to actually do that is, so when I read and I read and I read, I see that managers are able to do that because they are going to imitate other companies that are also disclosing similar information. They are going to imitate other companies disclosing in that kind of information. So if I'm going to do this, readers will be able to see, oh, I am also a good company because I disclose, but I am not really actually disclosing credible information. So how will companies be able to do that? How are they going to imitate? Okay, and based on the readings that I read, the way they imitate is, okay, in a few literature, I identify that they are able to do that because, especially in Malaysia during that time, board of directors, they are actually sitting on many board of companies. They call it board interlock or multiple boards. All right. So say, for example, I am a board member in one company. I can also be board members in other 7 companies. So if I am also board members in other 7 companies, I will be able to know what other companies are doing. So when I know what other companies are doing, I can also imitate and do it for my company. Okay, so that's what I noticed, okay, based on my reading. So now I'll be able to find the variables that I want to use in my study. Okay, so can you see how I actually find the variables in my study? Okay, the steps that I have actually done allow me to actually, as I proceed further in my study, I am able to progress accordingly. Okay, so this is why it is very important for you to have a good model so that you can complete your thesis, rather than keep changing what you want to do. Okay, all right. So if you have a model, you will also be able to, like, say for example, suddenly you realize that it's not that correct. Okay, it's not that appropriate for you to look at. Okay, so you can just refine, say for example, one portion of your model. Okay, rather than revamp everything. Okay, so if you have a model, you'll be able to refine so that your thesis or your research work is going to be of the best possible quality. Okay, all right. Next, link the theoretical perspectives and gap in the literature. Okay, link the theoretical perspectives and gap in the literature, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to contribute. Okay, so now, based on the framework just now, or the model just now, I am able to actually come up with more specific variables to actually work on in my research. Okay, so based on the model, and then I continue to read, I will be able to find the variables that I want to work on in my thesis. Okay, so you can see on the left hand side, signaling theory. That is the big cluster theory for my agency theory that I am using specifically for my study. Okay, so so when I actually write my literature, I am actually going to talk about signaling theory, but that signaling theory is only going to actually lead into my agency theory perspective that I am using for my study. Why am I looking at signaling theory literature? Because under the signaling theory articles, they are talking about sending credible information. Okay, and that's the reason why I am also looking at literature related to signaling theory. And this is very important actually, because sometimes postgraduate students, they say, oh, I am going to do agency theory. And suddenly you are not actually able to discuss robustly your hypothesis and so on, because the context under the signaling theory is missing. Okay, so that is the importance of having that big umbrella theory and then the specific theoretical perspective as well. Okay, I will show you what it means slightly later. All right, next, under the second perspective that I am looking at in my study is legitimacy theory. So under legitimacy theory, the big umbrella is legitimacy theory. Basically, legitimacy theory is actually talking about managing stakeholders' impression. Doesn't matter what organization are doing. Basically, when you want to manage stakeholders' impression, it is under the legitimacy theory. Okay, and I am specifically looking at how company imitate other companies. So that theoretical perspective, specific theoretical perspective, is under institutional theory. So can you see the relationship between the big theory and the specific theory that I am using? Okay, so I hope you can see the big theory and the specific theory that I am using. So that is what we mean by very, that is the academic work that you need to actually incorporate in a PhD work or master by thesis work, master by research work, sorry. Okay, a very robust theoretical perspective. All right, okay, moving on. So once you have done that, the significance of study is actually now very simple. Okay, so you can see, for example, in my study, this study offers an attempt to analyze the various governance mechanism. Okay, because at that time it was a new thing, so most articles were only looking at one control governance mechanism, and I am actually looking at emerging papers during that period. They are looking at a group of governance mechanism. Okay, and number two, by considering the effects of institutional pressure, this study differs from most previous studies in the area that were confined to examination of corporate governance structure on management voluntary disclosure decision. Actually, that is one very important contribution that I made in my study, the second one. The first one, not so significant, but the second one is something very new. So I would actually recommend to you, if you are identifying specific theory for your model, identify one very established theory, like in my case, I am using agency theory, and then identify one fairly new theory to actually make a very significant contribution. Okay, so in my case, I am actually integrating institutional theory in my study. Okay, so part 3, because I am able to actually find number 2, I am actually able to extend further to make even more significant contribution by extending the scope of this study to consider the credibility of the information disclosed. This study contributes to the existing literature that is only confined to how much to disclose. I am actually looking at not just how much to disclose, because that is not enough. You need to see whether the amount of information has certain quality or not. Okay, so I am able to actually look at that because I see it from different perspective. I add on one new element. Okay, all right. Now, in addition to what I have just mentioned, to be able to find your gaps and contribution, when you actually use this approach, the step 1, step 2, and step 3 that I mentioned earlier, you will be able to actually read the articles, the journal articles, how do I say this, critically. Okay, your supervisor or everybody, when you actually listen to any sharing session, they will say that you need to do a critical literature review. What does it mean by critical literature review? Okay, because when I started in my PhD journey, I know the term critical journal review. I said, what does it mean? How do I criticize? I am still doing my research. I don't know how to criticize. Actually, it's not about criticizing. Basically, you read it and you'll be able to see from different perspectives. Basically, the perspective that you want to research on. That is what is meant by critical review of the study. Okay, that's how I actually define for myself critical review, because if you want to come up with a review paper of last 5 years research being done in the area, I do not have that capacity or the capability when I started my PhD journey. Okay, so and I think it is the same with many others as well. Okay, we have just started, especially for me, I have never read an article before I started doing my PhD. So how can you ask me to do critical review? I am still struggling to understand what is actually being written in the article. Okay, so this is what we mean by critical review for your PhD work. Okay. All right, now let me show you an example. Now you already see the big framework, the big model, and then the specific model. Okay, so what I have actually shared just now, the big model and the specific model. Okay, now I'm going to show you an example. All right, so number 1. So this is something different, okay, not from what I did, okay, but this is something, say for example, you want to do in this area, you want to do something, okay, you want to do a research work, okay. So what is the current situation in Malaysia? I'm taking it from Malaysian perspective, okay. So the Malaysia's economy and many other countries are currently experiencing a contraction caused by COVID-19 pandemic. That is well known around the world. According to the World Bank report, Malaysia's gross domestic income is forecasted to contract between 1% to 4.6%. Okay, that was reported last year. Now it's even worse maybe. Many businesses, including public listed companies, are facing significant decline in their revenues and share prices. Okay, so the implication of this situation is how can management of public listed companies continue to get support from investors, customers, and other stakeholders? Okay, because you need to get support from investors, customers especially, and all the other stakeholders, or else you cannot continue to sustain in this current environment. Okay, so this is one perspective, because so now we know that this is the issue. Okay, how can I now translate it into my research work? How can I translate this into my research work? Okay, because I believe that when you decided to do your PhD, it is not easy actually to find what you want to work on the next 2 years or 3 years. Okay, you wish that someone come in and tell you here you are, this is the topic that you can do, okay? But it is not that way, okay? You need to find it yourself, all right? So I know the situation. Now, how do I actually match with my expertise, current expertise, capitalize on my knowledge that I have to do research in this area? This is the current issue, okay? Now, at the same time, the government is calling for collaborative efforts among various stakeholders. We are hearing everywhere now in the news and so on, we have to work together. It is a collaborative effort. Inclusive, inclusive society. No one is going to be left behind. Okay, resources are dwindling. Resources are now very small. We need to come together and combine the resources, okay, to address the current issues, okay, in ensuring the country's economic sustainability and well-being of the people post-COVID-19. So we know about this. Everybody need to chip in, okay. Even in UiTM, our allowances have been actually reduced, okay. We have to contribute to the government pool, okay, of resources, all right. So everybody has to chip in. So this reflects current government initiatives, and this establishes an expectation even for public listed companies to engage in socio-economic development, because I am thinking, oh, maybe my interest, because my area is financial accounting and reporting, my interest is more on public listed companies, okay? So important mechanism for companies to manage the above expectation is through its voluntary information. So I want to tell others that I am actually I am also contributing to the current country's economic situation. Okay, so this actually provide justification to do the research. All right, so now I want to see, now I want to go down further. Okay, I've already shown you earlier. Okay, so it is an important, again, it is voluntary disclosure, but what kind of voluntary disclosure I am looking at? Okay, what kind of voluntary disclosure I am looking at? All right, moving down. So now I am looking at, okay, this one I have done earlier. Okay, so now I know I'm going to show you just now. Okay, sorry, I want to actually explain to you the how to identify the theories. Number one, just now I've already shown you how to identify. This slide is actually to show you how to understand the theory well. Before you know the theory that you want to use, you must be able to understand the theory first. Very important to understand, okay? So you will read a few, sometimes an article will actually put down institutional theory. Sometimes it doesn't even say any theoretical perspective in the title, but once it actually starts talking, writing the content of the journal article, it will actually guide you to know that this is actually related to a certain particular theory, okay? Normally they will mention in the body of the theory. So here, okay, how do I know that this is relevant? I'm actually just showing you an example. How do I know that this theoretical perspective, this theory is relevant to my focus of study, okay? So you can see in the abstract, okay, the last part in the abstract, okay? Let me just read. Hang on, okay. Our study suggests that, take note, yeah, they are actually looking at, what were they looking at? They are looking at government decision to adopt generally accepted accounting principles, nothing to do with disclosure. Okay, so that's the reason why I said, if you follow the steps just now, you are going to be able to find other articles beyond your narrow scope of that you have actually confined yourself. Okay, so if you say that, oh, I'm only going to look at voluntary disclosure, you are not going to be able to see, even though you have come across this article, you might not actually think that this is relevant to you. Okay, so that's the reason why it's important to follow the steps I have shared earlier. Okay, so when I read, okay, I see that our study suggests that all strategic responses to resist institutional pressure for gap adoption will ultimately fail because of the potency of institutional pressure that result from well-organized accounting and governmental institutional field. So what it is saying is that even though they are there are pressures for companies to actually use corporate governance, okay, to implement corporate governance in their companies. It might fail because of they call it institutional pressure, okay, other factors. Okay, so here what they are saying is that from an institutional theory perspective, even though, say for example, the government wants companies to implement certain thing, they might actually be able to find ways to actually overcome that force by the government. So because I am actually looking at, just now when I was saying to you, I am going to look at management are going to disclose, but they are not actually going to disclose information that is credible. So this article is very relevant to me, even though it is not talking about voluntary disclosure, but they are actually talking about management behavior in that context, the context that I am actually researching on. Okay, so this is how you identify relevant articles, okay, for your model. Once you have your big model, and then you have your you have your big model and you have your specific model, which is I call empirical schema, you can call it any other name, okay? So you have the variables. Now you'll be able to actually refine your research objectives, okay? So having a model is very important, okay? It is going to guide you throughout your thesis, okay, throughout your research work, as well as completing the write-up of your thesis. So the broad aim is to increase understanding of management incentive to disclose information by investigating why managers disclose more or less voluntary information, with particular reference to management response to calls for corporate transparency by corporate governance movement. Okay. So I just highlight that is the first perspective that I've already highlighted to you at the beginning of the session, and to provide new empirical evidence on the effects of enhanced corporate voluntary disclosure on the retained earnings relationship. That is actually the proxy that I use to measure credibility of the information disclosed, in order to assist corporate governance regulators and other policymakers in assessing the benefits of additional recommended disclosure for increasing corporate transparency. Okay, so at the end of the day, I am testing the robustness of the theories specifically in agency theory and institutional theory. Okay, all right. So that is my broad aim of study, and the specific aim is to model and provide evidence of the governance structure. Okay, and mimetic isomorphism. Mimetic is actually what it means is to imitate other companies. Okay, as two directions of response by management to calls for greater corporate transparency on the extent of voluntary disclosure, and then number two, to assess the credibility, and then finally to draw inferences from the competing influences. Okay, because corporate governance is supposed to actually influence companies to disclose credible information, but on the other hand, the other theoretical perspective I am saying is that they are not actually disclosing credible information. That's the reason why I said two competing influences. All right. Okay. So by having the model, I am now able to actually refine my objective, and it is also, to me, I think it's very interesting. Okay. You need to be excited about your work as well. Okay. Now I'm going to show you research model guide to structure of thesis. Okay. How you when you have your research model, it is going to actually guide you to develop the structure of your thesis. So now you can see, especially in chapter number 2, okay, and this is going to actually influence your development of hypothesis, your variables, and so on. So now I know I am looking at agency theory, and the reason behind it is because management is not disclosing certain information. I call it information asymmetry. I am looking at specific variables on ownership structure, board composition, in the context of corporate governance and also corporate disclosure. That is my focus of study on my dependent variable. So now I am actually able to structure my literature review chapter, because I have the model. It is actually reflecting my model. So when actually examiners read your thesis, they are not going to be wondering what is this about. They are guided by the model, by your research model in understanding the literature review. They can immediately see what you are writing on. Okay, all right. As with the other theoretical perspective, in the model, legitimacy theory, institutional theory, and corporate disclosure. Okay, all right. So I'm just going to show you what I meant just now by having, take note. Okay, I wrote some. This is the 3 parts in my literature review. I started with my legitimacy theory. That is the big umbrella for my institutional theory that I am using in my study. But in my literature review, I still write about legitimacy theory because it is actually linked to, or it provides the foundation to my institutional theory. Okay, I repeat. The reason I write about legitimacy theory is because it provides the foundation to the institutional theory that I am using in the context of corporate disclosure that I am researching on. Okay, it is linked. Initially, actually, for your information, when I started writing my thesis, I thought I was not able to find legitimacy theory. I thought I am only using institutional theory. And when I started to write, I was not able to justify why am I looking at institutional theory. Suddenly, I cannot actually proceed. I was not able actually to really write a proper justification for the use of institutional theory in the context of my study. Okay. And then I move down to, I write a little bit on legitimacy theory and then institutional theory. Okay, now let me show you what I meant. Okay, so in several areas, so this is how I started this part. Okay, in several areas of reporting, particularly relating to environmental and social responsibility activities. Take note, when I read the literature on legitimacy theory, they are not talking about corporate, they are not talking about general voluntary disclosure. Mostly they were writing on voluntary information in the context of environmental and social responsibility activities. But is it relevant to me? Yes. Okay, because okay, you will see later. Management incentive to disclose more detailed information beyond the legal requirements. That is my perspective. Voluntary, have been driven by their desire to gain legitimacy. Okay, and the actions to gain legitimacy can be summarized by the definition of legitimacy, provided that that is the guru of legitimacy theory, okay, in a review of the literature on organizational legitimacy. So I understand what it means by legitimacy, okay, legitimacy. Next, from an institutional theory perspective, the desire to gain or maintain legitimacy. So you can see suddenly there is institutional theory under this legitimacy theory. So that's when I actually started to write my literature review. I suddenly realized, am I looking at legitimacy or am I looking at institutional theory? Okay, I was at a crossroad. Am I changing my theory? No. When I read further, I realized that they are related. And for my perspective, for my study, that legitimacy theory is the big umbrella, institutional theory is the specific theory that I am using. Okay, how do I know? Because the variables are related to institutional theory. So the desire to gain or maintain legitimacy will lead an organization to adopt similar structures, strategies, and processes. Take note, I said they imitate, okay, so it makes sense. So the resemblance of an organization to other organization in its environment is defined by these two researchers as isomorphism. Okay, so then I started to talk about the isomorphism. All right, and then I actually explain legitimacy theory in the context of disclosure. Okay, and then I link to disclosure. Once I've done that, I move specifically to my theory. Okay, institutional theory under the influence of legitimation will adopt similar structure through a process called isomorphism. Now it falls into places. Now all the theoretical perspective fall into places in my model. Okay, so I hope you can see this, and I really hope you, once we are done with this, you can actually, whatever I am sharing can be a guide to you. Okay, all right. So now, I am done with how to actually develop the model just now. So now, as I actually mentioned to Dr. Azila before we started the session today, I said that we are in an era where there are substantial opportunities in research. Okay, and I like what he said. He actually said this before COVID, okay? Rather than getting nostalgic, embrace the new opportunities and challenges available to you now, okay? And it is a very exciting era because we have so many new issues that we can do research on, okay? And it is very important for you to actually do research in the relevant areas, okay? So if not, okay, if you feel that you want to do something so very important, but it might not actually be that important anymore in the new normal. Okay, so you can see if anyone have read this article, you can see in the picture there's a bridge. It is a very well-designed bridge that it can actually how do I say this? No matter what comes, it will actually be able to stand the shock of earthquake and so on. Okay, so it's a very well designed bridge, but is it relevant? The river has shifted. The bridge was designed with the objective for people, for everyone using the bridge to cross the river. So if you are doing a research that is not relevant, that's what you are doing. You are actually you are designing a bridge that is no longer relevant because it cannot be used to cross the river. Okay, so I really like this. Okay, the bridge on the river. I don't know how to pronounce it. Maybe Choluteka. Okay. All right, so we do not want to come up with our findings that will be like this, okay? All right, now let me show you an example, very current example, okay? Right, so I read this, I read this in the newspapers, okay? I see so many articles on this. Corporate social responsibility can be a game changer. Everybody talking about this, okay? Because we want companies to actually contribute to the current situation, okay? So they are saying that the coronavirus has plunged the economy into deep recession all over the world. Millions of people are now unemployed in developing countries, and Malaysia is no exception. That is true, okay? However, government resources are limited, very true as well. We can work more with the government in transforming our society in post-corona days. Possibility, right? Dr. Azila, am I presenting?
Yes, Prof. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So next, okay. So now and then, recently, we read on this, okay, about the healthcare issues in Malaysia. We all know it's about healthcare. COVID is about health issues, okay? And despite challenge, so they come up with this new strategic framework for medical program in Malaysia, 2021 to 2025, currently and the next until 2025. But I am in the area of financial reporting and accounting. What do I do with, is this relevant to me? Yes, it is, okay? Let me show you how to actually link to your area of expertise, okay? You know the situation, like I said just now, there are so many issues. How do you actually link to your area of expertise so that you can actually do a research on it, all right? And then as I read further, role of collaborative healthcare in improving social sustainability, a conceptual framework. This is something to do with healthcare. Okay, they come up with a framework to actually improve social sustainability. It begins to actually attract my attention. Right, next, I see in companies' annual reports, because I am interested in public listed companies. I see in companies' annual reports, they are also actually doing this. Okay, they are actually reporting on what they are doing in the area of healthcare. Okay, next. How to match to my area of interest. Okay, and I see that by actually looking at collaborative effort, you can actually create value not just to the society but to your companies as well. And this is something very new as well, even though it is 2018, but it is actually now the recent paper is actually now emerging actually about this, achieving, they call it shared triple bottom line. Okay, that means companies can actually create more profit through creating or contributing to the society as well. Okay, and as I think further, maybe I am more interested now on corporate zakat. Okay, corporate zakat, because I can see in the news now, say for example, our Majlis Agama Islam allocating 2 million for ASNAF or for those affected by the COVID-19 and so on. Okay, so and then the Islamic financial institutions are now actually restructuring their organization to actually strategically place the Islamic social finance, i.e. zakat, sedekah and so on, as part of their business operation as well. So I think that is something that I am interested in, that is actually going to be aligned with my area of interest. Okay, so as I read further, okay, how does a collaborative healthcare model can meet practical needs of the key stakeholders and foster social sustainability? I want to look at this key area, key research question, key focus, okay, based on the information earlier that I've read. How do I actually read and refine my research focus? Okay, I shared this with Dr. Azila earlier, and I also see this in the annual reports of Nescafe Malaysia, especially. Okay, and they actually launched, okay, building a sustainable coffee future through Nescafe Classic Kopi Kedah. So what they have actually done, they actually guide. They actually develop small farmers in Kedah to actually plant coffee beans. Okay, and those coffee beans are actually going to be the coffee beans that they are going to use to manufacture Nescafe in Malaysia. So they are actually contributing to the society as well as actually enhancing the quality of the coffee beans that they are going to develop into their products. Okay, so that is what we meant by identifying a new market segment, and then you are also actually able to contribute to the society and increase your profit as well. Okay, all right. So now I turn it into my conceptual model. So what I am interested is, at the end, the value creation. That means I am actually able to enhance the competitive advantage of the company as well as sustainable impact to healthcare initiative. Okay, what am I looking at? I am actually looking at whether companies can actually do that or not. Okay, drivers for the CSR initiative. So I am actually looking at social capabilities of companies. So when I want to look at social capabilities of company, what do I mean? Do they actually have that capability to come out with strategic CSR, or are they just doing responsive CSR? What do I mean by responsive CSR? i.e. acting as a good corporate citizen, attuned to the evolving social concerns of stakeholders and mitigating or anticipated adverse effect from business activity. But if you move beyond good corporate citizenship and actually towards developing competitive advantage of your company, that is what we call strategic CSR. But to be able to do that, you must have the social capabilities. And under that perspective, when I read, I see that the theoretical perspective that is relevant for me is social resource-based view theory. And this is a fairly new theory. It is under the umbrella of resource-based view theory. Okay, so that is how you actually identify what you want to focus on. I am just actually showing you the comprehensive example. In the new, basically the steps are the same. But now I actually shortcut a little bit because I've already shown you the detailed development just now. Okay, so I'm just to wrap up the session. Okay, this is just to show you examples of what I have shared in April 2021 when I was invited to be one of the keynote speakers for this international conference on governance and sustainability. To talk about navigating research around pandemic-induced socio-economic landscape. Okay, just to share you a few areas that you can work on. Okay, so the reason is because I think we can actually really contribute through our research work. The severe COVID-19 crisis demanded the very essence of what an academic with a mission stands for, to contribute to the significant transitions that are shaping the world we live in. Take note, there are going to be significant transitions that are shaping the world we live in. Okay, so this example, all right. So what am I showing you? Okay, I am showing you reporting on the website of Sunbear NGO. Why am I showing this? Because this NGO is very good in actually reporting to the stakeholder to actually secure support from them, and they are very sustainable. Imagine in this current economic environment, they are getting strong financial support from their funder on a long-term basis to look after the bear in our rainforest in Sabah. Okay, so what have they done actually to do that? Okay, so so I am actually looking, so here actually it is highlighting about sustainability of NGOs, because in the current situation, people are always talking about public listed companies having economic issues and so on. NGOs are the same. Okay, they are even worse because they are actually getting funding from those who are actually making money, right? And we heard about another issue, accountability of NGOs. Okay, a recent issue about misappropriation funds from NGOs to the Palestinians. Okay, so again, those are the areas of research that you can actually do on if you are interested in that area. And if I look at these two research issues, my interest will be aligned to how do I actually come up with an effective reporting for NGOs so that they can be sustainable financially, or they can actually discharge the accountability to the stakeholders. Okay, so this is one area. Another one is, okay, there are so many organizations now developing sustainable micro entrepreneurs, especially because of the COVID-19 effect. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, in many Islamic financial institutions, they are actually restructuring their business to have one department to actually disperse social finance to actually fund the development of sustainable micro entrepreneurs. Okay, and we are actually also doing a work on this, developing a framework for assessing operational issues and evaluating and measuring the socio-economic impact of the new collaborative model. Okay, in relation to the previous slide that I have shared with. Okay, so at the end, I want to say that all of you are genius. Okay, and all of you can do it. And I wish you to have an enjoyable journey in completing your thesis. Okay, but I really like this statement. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Okay, so with that, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for a very rich and insightful sharing. So I think we are very lucky to have Prof. Rosayani with us this morning, as Prof has explained a very detailed step on how to develop a model in Masters of Research and PhD thesis. And Prof also has shared with us on the area that we can look into in the era of post-COVID-19. So now we allow for Q&A session with Prof. Rushaiyani. Thus, for the Q&A session, I will read the question that are appeared in the chat box and Prof will answer the question. So Prof, can we start the session, Prof?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, now we go for the question number 1. So if we look into the question number 1, one of the participants, he or she did ask on, does the research mode is equal with the research framework?
Sorry, ulang.
Does the research mode is similar with the research framework?
Okay. I think when you say research mode, I think you mean research model is similar to research framework. As I mentioned in my earlier slides on definition, I say that there are various definitions on conceptual framework, theoretical framework, research model. Okay, so there are various terms, but and there are various definitions as well. But for me, what I am trying to highlight to you is coming out with a big model to actually guide you to come up with the operational variables that you want to research on. So I am not actually trying to answer your questions in the sense that are they the same or are they not the same? Because different researchers have different perspective. And if you are working with your supervisors, definitely every one of you here are working with your supervisors, they will have different perspectives. So that's the reason why I am not actually trying to strictly define what I meant by conceptual model, theoretical model, and so on. Okay, I hope I answer that question.
All right, Prof. For the question number 2, okay, one of the participants, she asked on the steps 2A, in which she said that what is the difference between coding and themes?
Coding and themes?
Yeah, coding and themes in our literature review.
Okay. I'm not sure what you mean by coding, but when I say themes, basically it's the group of literature that are related to the focus of your study, to the perspective of your study. So when you do coding, I think now because of the software that you are using, you have different coding for your literature review. Okay, so when you use a certain software, you will have a coding for your literature. You can actually match the coding with the themes. Okay, so but I am not actually showing you how to actually organize your literature review. So that's the reason why I am actually saying here identify the themes, because I want to show in the context of developing your model. So that is very technical question actually.
Yes. Okay, now we go for the question number 3. In the thesis, do we need to put both the theoretical and conceptual framework?
Okay. Actually, I noticed many of my friends who are supervising their students, they do not have conceptual framework. They do not have conceptual framework, but because I was trained to develop a conceptual framework, and from that conceptual framework, I developed my theoretical framework. So I actually use that approach because I find that it's very helpful in completing the whole thesis, in actually also guiding you. So for my students, I always ask them to do the conceptual framework first. So to actually be clear on the conceptual framework before actually moving on to the remaining parts of the study. So it is, but to me, whether you put it in your thesis or not is up to your supervisor. But to me, no matter what, you need to have your conceptual framework. That is my belief, okay? That is my approach.
Okay, Prof, thank you. For the next question, one of the student, he mentioned or she mentioned on the literature review. Or the student or the participant mentioned that the situation that is not frequently happen, or the area is not being really mentioned in Malaysia, but in somewhere else in the other countries. So, but in Malaysia, we we discuss on the issues, but it is in the newspaper, in the annual report, or in the ministry report. So in that case, what the student should do?
Okay. Quite a long question, but if I understand it correctly, okay, your question is actually trying to ask on how to actually identify or to refine what you want to work on in your research. Okay, so you know that it is happening at the international level or outside Malaysia, and there are already literature looking at it. Okay, and you know it is happening in Malaysia, but you only look at it in the newspaper reports, in the social media updates, and so on. So what you should do? Okay, the example that I've shown you actually is exactly what your question is about. Okay, when I say that, okay, especially the comprehensive example that I shared with you, I said that it is happening, but it is also actually happening in Malaysia, but no articles being written on it yet in the context of collaborative healthcare framework. It is the framework is actually a white paper or a policy paper, and there is no researcher who has actually done any research work on that issue yet. But there are already emerging articles in the at the international level. Okay, and especially now, if you notice, actually the article I shared with you is actually a free article by a very reputable journal. They are actually doing a CSR to actually make it public, because they feel that it can benefit the researchers and others as well during this current situation in finding new solution. So normally that article will not actually be shared if you do not buy the article. Okay, but because of the current situation, they are sharing it. So I was able to actually get that article because of that situation, and there are emerging articles. So that articles actually guide us to come up with the framework or the research topic that we want to research on. We actually are working on it actually on that healthcare, collaborative healthcare.
Okay, Prof, we go to the next question. Actually, this thing have been mentioned. It's about a theory, Prof. And the participant is asking on how do you actually define theory? Because sometimes in article, the authors or the author did not mention specifically what are the theories that being used in his or her research.
What was the earlier part?
He asked on the definitions of theory.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, the definition of theory. I think it's not about the definition of theory. I think because the second part was, the question was on, you read an article, there was no specific mention of the theory that is being used for that particular article. Okay, so the first part is the definition of theory. So for example, what I'm trying to share with you here is many articles actually, especially in the area of accounting and reporting, there are no specific mention of theory in the article. But when you read the argument and so on, it actually in a way it is better, because when you read the argument, the hypothesis and so on, the discussion and so on, it will actually have a reflection of certain theoretical perspective. So you will be able to actually use that article for your benefit. So that means, say for example, you want to use legitimacy theory, and in that particular article, it doesn't mention about legitimacy theory, but the argument, the hypothesis, the discussion and so on reflects the characteristic of legitimacy theory. So you can actually use that that article for your research. So I am not actually defining a theory because a theory is already there, okay? And you need to understand what it means about that theory. What does that theory says, okay? So once you, that's the reason why I said you need to understand what is the theory about. So once you understand what the theory is about, it doesn't matter whether the article specify the theoretical perspective or not, you will be able to use it from your perspective.
Okay, we go to the next one, to the next question. Okay, this researcher or this student, he or she would like to identify factors that influence self-awareness.
Self-awareness?
Yes, self-awareness. But there are limited articles that are discussing on that particular issues, that particular areas. And most of the articles are talking about cybercrime or cyber security awareness. So his question is, should I choose another topic or objective?
Okay. Your question is actually focusing on how to find articles on self-awareness.
Theft awareness.
Huh?
Mencuri, theft, T-H-E-F.
Oh, theft.
Theft awareness.
Okay, theft awareness. This is the first time I am hearing this theft awareness. Okay, theft awareness. Your question is whether there are limited articles, whether you should actually find a new focus of study. I don't really know the context of your study, because as I said earlier, when I shared with you step number 1, I am looking at voluntary disclosure. So if I confine to voluntary disclosure, I will not actually find many articles. But when I started to identify why I want to look at voluntary disclosure, the credibility perspective, the impression perspective, then suddenly I see many other relevant articles. So I think before you decide to actually change another perspective, because I do not know the reason behind you looking at theft perspective or theft awareness. Sorry. So theft awareness from what perspective? So if you are saying theft awareness in terms of cyber security, basically you do not want to actually steal other people's I don't know, soft data or so on, okay? So that can be your theft awareness as well. But I do not know your context. So what is your perspective? Are you looking at theft awareness in that perspective? So if you have your perspective, I think you should be able to actually expand the literature search. So that is the reason why it is important to have that themes or perspective. The step number 1. Oh no, step number 2, sorry. Or number 1.
Oh, okay, Prof. We go to the next question. I think we have a number of questions that asking on theories, Prof. And this is another one. Should we explain the theory? Start from the umbrella. That's what you mentioned, the umbrella theory. Okay, then go to the specific theory.
Yes, the answer is definitely yes. The reason I say yes, but make sure you do not actually, the point to remember is when you explain the umbrella theory, is not the umbrella theory as is. So that means you do not actually write so much on the umbrella theory that is not relevant to your context. So as I actually showed you in my slides just now, when I am actually showing the example on legitimacy, I am actually linking it all from the perspective of my institutional theory. So when you write the umbrella need to be from that specific perspective that you want to use. It's not like writing a lot on legitimacy umbrella theory without any context. So you will be like writing so many irrelevant points, okay?
Okay, this is about a framework, Prof. The student asked on, okay, I plan to do a thesis on digital literacy among Malaysians, but there is no specific framework for this. I read an article used in Australia on measuring digital literacy. So can I use their guidelines as the framework of my research?
Hang on. Theoretical perspective. Hang on. Can somebody is at my door? Okay, my apologies. The delivery guy will not leave me alone. That's the new normal. Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah,
So your question just now is you are looking at digital literacy among Malaysians, and there is no framework. And you want to use someone's framework on what was it just now?
The Australian framework in his research as the framework.
Okay. When I actually say framework, you are looking at digital literacy in Malaysia, but which specific segment of the population that you are looking at? Okay, and why do you want to look at that specific population segment? Because when you want to do research, you need to actually be very focused. Your focus must be very specific because at the end of the day, you need to come up with the sample and then the research methods and so on, the theoretical perspective, the framework and so on. So your statement just now, you are looking at digital literacy in Malaysia. That is very wide. And you need to zoom down to identifying the population segment and why that particular population segment. Okay, say for example, I give you an example. We are one of our recent work, we look at financial literacy in Malaysia. But financial literacy, why? The reason is because under the OECD, they are saying that financial literacy is very low in Malaysia, and in the context of current COVID situation, because of the low financial literacy in Malaysia, that's why many people now are facing severe financial hardship because they do not have sufficient saving and so on. Okay, because they have low financial literacy. So we are looking at financial literacy, but we cannot say that we are looking at financial literacy among all Malaysians. We only focus on secondary school children. Why are we looking at secondary school children? Because we argue that based on the argument is that we want to look at whether embedding financial literacy in the school curriculum will actually prepare the population to be a better adults later to have financial literacy. So that's, you need to actually refine further rather than saying you want to look at digital literacy and you are going to take that particular framework. Okay, you cannot actually take the framework as is, you need to adapt that particular framework. So I assume you already know the population segment that you are looking at, but that particular framework that you want to look at can only be used to guide you in actually designing your own unique framework, because this is your PhD work or your master's work. Okay. All right. I hope I answer your question.
Okay, Prof. Another question. The question is, does planning or data collection or data analysis is considered research framework?
No, it is not considered as framework. That is research methods. But it will be guided, still again, it will be guided by your research model. Because at the end of the day, when you want to collect your data, you want to analyze your data, you must be able to answer your focus in your research question.
All right. So it's very clear. It is a no answers. Yeah. So we go to the next one. Okay, Prof. This is about issues and problem statement. How can we determine the issues that has been addressed in an article?
Sorry, in?
In the article. In the article.
How
can we determine the issues that has been addressed in an article? I'm not so sure whether it is the issues that being discussed in the introduction part or the issues that being addressed at the discussion or at the result part.
Yeah, I am also not clear. How to
determine or how to identify.
Okay, how to determine research issue in an article.
Yes.
If I understand correctly. So when you actually read an article and the article will normally say the objective of this paper or this study, okay? So when you see that the objective and then it will actually, the introduction will actually next move on to the reason behind the objective. So the reason behind the objective is actually the issue or the gap that they are trying to address. So it's very simple actually.
Okay, Prof, we have another question from Zulaika Nawal, and the question is, how may I know if my topic is acceptable for a PhD level? Other than citing from a current article, is there any other way to prove that the title that the student would like to investigate is at the PhD level?
Okay. The question is very general because you only ask me. If you actually share with me the title, then I can actually try to actually make an assessment. But if you say that, how do I know that my title is a PhD level? It actually boils down to your research issue, research gap. So it's not really so much about the title. It is actually about the research gap that you are trying, or the research question that you are researching on. So that means, so once having said that, it is about the research gap that you are trying to address, and with that research gap, you are going to make significant contribution, and that will actually be reflected in your research title. Okay, so if you follow that step number 1, you know the gap. Number 2, you will be able to answer the gap and provide contribution. And with those two, you can actually refine your title, and that title should be accepted at PhD level.
Okay. We're going to look into the contribution, isn't it, Prof? Especially the body.
At the end of the day, if you don't contribute, because sometimes, especially at the beginning stage, when you read, you feel, and in the paper it says that not many research has been done. Sometimes not many doesn't mean that you need to do. That means you don't have to do it anymore.
Correct.
Okay. Like that particular bridge.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, Prof, we go to the next question. It's still about literature. I think most of the participants, most of the students that are attending our session today is mostly they are at the semester 1 and semester 2, because most of the question they are talking about the literature review, isn't it, Prof? The framework and the theories. So we go to the next question. I think Prof have mentioned about this thing previously. And Nabila, this came from Nabila. She said that if there is no literature review in the context of Malaysia, but we have the issues is being discussed in the newspaper. Okay, so can I still do my research on the title that is intended to do, but the LR is very less?
Okay. All right. As Dr. Azila said, I have actually mentioned about this. You can do, okay, imagine, I just said just now, issues on NGO, misappropriation of money collected to the Palestinians. Okay, there was a big hoo-ha, there was a big issue on money collected from the people of Malaysia, and NGOs are in charge of giving it to the Palestinians, and many accusations against NGOs not actually giving accountably to the Palestinians. Okay, and there are definitely no literature on that particular topic. Okay, because it has just happened and no particular article on that. But can we do research? Yes. Okay, as I mentioned earlier. What research to do on? Okay, because my area is in reporting, is in accounting, my strength is in reporting. I want to do how NGOs can actually discharge that they are an accountable organization through their reporting practices. So there are a lot of reporting framework, reporting practices by NGOs. Maybe not in Malaysia, but at international level by other researchers. And accountability, how to discharge accountability. There are a lot of articles in that area. So especially for, as I mentioned earlier, if you are just embarking on your research journey, you will feel that way because you are so confined in your reading. You need to have an open mind, like I said just now, you need to have the context and you need to dig for the why. And because of that why, you will be able to find the article that is related to the why. Okay, if everybody has done it, then your supervisor will be saying, so what is your contribution? That is even worse. Okay.
Okay, Prof. Interesting. Now we go to another question. It's about literature review, but it's related to all literature, all citation. Okay. He said that I am a master student in semester 1. My topic is about market acceptance on futuristic food. It's a very interesting area, Prof. Futuristic food.
Can you repeat?
The topic is market acceptance on futuristic food.
Futuristic food?
Futuristic food, yes. But the articles about futuristic food are very limited. Okay. How am I supposed to build a model when most of the journals that I found are mostly from 90s?
Okay, all right. If I am not a person in futuristic food or market acceptance, okay, but I can see, okay, when you say futuristic food, and I can imagine in the current situation, there are not so many articles on futuristic food, but the key article will be based on the very old article, like the one I showed just now. When I was using legitimacy, I refer to the guru of legitimacy, Suchman or Suchman, in 1995. But following that, okay, for the futuristic food, you can actually take, because you are looking at acceptance, market acceptance. You don't need to actually look at articles on futuristic food. If you have an open mind, you will be able to see market acceptance in the context of anything new. So you can definitely do a good research work on this. Okay, so you just need to have an open mind. Don't limit yourself to be able to see only specific narrow scope.
Yeah. Futuristic food, Prof. Okay. Okay, now now we go to the next question, Prof. Okay, does the dependent variable dictates the underlying theories to be used?
No. the dependent variable does not dictate actually the perspective that you want to research on. The reason behind why you want to look at the dependent variable actually influence the theoretical perspective that you choose.
Okay, we go to the next question. In literature review, is it compulsory for our dependent variable and independent variable? They need to be related with Malaysian current situation. What if the independent variable is very limited in the context of Malaysia?
Okay, very good. Actually, that should be the case, especially at PhD level. If it is widely researched in the context of Malaysia, as I mentioned earlier, you will have difficulty in identifying the gap. So you should not actually do, unless you know something new that you are going to look at, then you can do. If not, it is something that is very researchable. If that is the situation, it is a very researchable area. Like I mentioned just now, I was looking at voluntary disclosure. There are so many, there are quite a number, not so many, there are quite a number on articles on voluntary disclosure in Malaysia, but the perspective that I am looking at, the credibility, the impression, almost none. Okay, so I know that is something that I can look at very well.
Okay, Prof, we go to the next question, and this question is about data collection. I think we have this question is quite critical, Prof. It's talking about data collection. What is your opinion, Prof, on data collection during this pandemic situation, right? Should the student change the data collection technique to reflect the current situation? Or if, let's say, the student change the data collection technique, will it affect the literature review and framework?
Okay, that just happened to one of my students yesterday as we have discussion, okay? Because not just actually to my student, it is actually across universities, okay? When we have recent discussion under our research office, where many researchers are having problem collecting data, okay? Even though we are in social science, we also have that problem, especially if you are sending questionnaires, okay? And not because you cannot send online or Google form and so on. It's not about that, because companies, say for example, you are sending questionnaire to companies. Companies are facing their own challenges now. And suddenly you want them to answer your question. You are not so important at this stage, okay? So what can you do, all right? So you need to realign. I'm not saying change, okay? You need to realign your data collection. So I actually, together with my co-supervisor, advise our student to actually do a focus group interview. So, but because of our networking, we are actually, initially the objective was, the method was to actually send questionnaire. But sending questionnaire during this current situation is going to be difficult. But if you do a focus group semi-structured interview online, okay, and there are already now emerging literatures talking about the justification for online interview because of the COVID situation. So we are now going to realign to do something like a mixed method to combine semi-structured interviews together with maybe a lesser number of survey questions. So it is doable to achieve the research objective. So we are not actually changing the research framework and so on. So you just need to realign to actually cater to the current situation.
So the keywords is agile, yeah, Prof? Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Agile.
Correct.
Okay, Prof, I think this is our last question for today's session.
Alhamdulillah, so many questions.
Yeah. And I think they are very focused while you are delivering your content just now. because we have a lot of questions from the participants. Okay, we go to the last question, Prof. Okay, this is a common question, Prof, because it talks about research gap and problem statement. I often receive a feedback that my research gap and problem statement are not strong enough and required to address probably the examiners or the one that been discussed with the student. They would like the students to address what are the push factors and symptoms. So how can I improve on this?
What are the push about?
What are the push factors and symptoms? The issues and symptoms, and the gaps as well, Prof.
Okay, so if that actually is quite common among many students, okay, the research gap is not there. But to find the research gap, normally what I do is actually look at the current industry situation. If like just now when I was sharing with you on the healthcare issues, so that is very current. And I don't think anybody will say that there is no issue on healthcare. Okay, so if you actually know clearly what are the issue that you are researching on at the industry level, and then you work backwards to actually align with the research work from the academic perspective, from your strength and so on. Then you will be able, then you will do actually research, literature review and so on. Then I think it will be very strong for you to actually work on to justify your research gap or research problem. Okay. Actually, the justification.
Okay, so, in another perspective, Prof are saying about practical gap, isn't it, Prof?
Yes, you must have practical gap. If not, it is very difficult for you just from the literature to convince your supervisors, your panels and so on to say that this is a gap.
Okay. It's a very insightful sharing, Prof. It's a very insightful session. So, dear lecturers and students, I think our session has come about to the end. So, for that note, I would like to say thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak-banyak to Prof. Dr. Roshayani for the valuable insight and sharing in this morning session. And I would like to say thank you as well for IPSIS, particularly Dr. Suhaili and team for organizing these valuable webinar sessions. So for the students, for the lecturers and for the student, thank you for joining the session. And inshallah, we will see you in the next webinar session. Stay safe and take a good care of ourselves. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you very much. Semua, Assalamualaikum.
And Azila Anis is signing
thank you,
out.
Dr. Azila. Okay, Assalamualaikum.
Prof, you would like to say something?
I just want you to have an open mind and believe that you can actually do a good job in your research work. Okay, with your research work. Just have an open mind and a strong belief. Okay, and inshallah. All right. Thank you very much.
That note, thank you very much, Prof. And hopefully that we are going to meet again in another session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay,
thank you all.